How's it going, guys? My name is Zach with the Movie Castle, and today we're going to be talking about Texas Chainsaw 3D. This is from 2013 and is directed by John Luessenhop and also stars Alexandra Daddario, who a lot of you guys know from True Detective Season 1. She was also in a Shirley Jackson adaptation quite recently, We Have Always Lived in This Castle, which I definitely recommend you check out if you're Shirley Jackson fans. Also note, Texas Chainsaw is what it reads on the cover. This is one of those cases where everybody knows this movie as Texas Chainsaw 3D, but if the DVD's not in 3D, they can't print 3D, so it just says Texas Chainsaw. Kind of like the Piranha remake, you know? Anyway, this is not a great, super good polished movie, but this is a ton of dumb fun. I'm not gonna lie, this movie has definite faults, but it is fun. It's got a lot of gore, it's got a lot of crazy kills. It's an excuse for Leatherface to, go roam around this haunted house and kill a bunch of people in fun over-the-top ways. It also has some new elements to it. Your main character is a Sawyer, which we hadn't seen before. There's a rival family element, which is new, and it also has a sympathetic look at Leatherface towards the end, which not every sequel did, which is really interesting and good. Now, this movie definitely does have some faults. It's super cheesy, like I said, and that's not going to make it for everybody, especially with the 3D elements. There's a few shots that are definitely meant to be in 3D. Throwing the chainsaw at the camera, pointing it right at the camera. There's a lot of that. There's also a few dumb decisions, one with the hitchhiker and one with this letter, and we'll get to those in a bit. And there also are just a few moments that you're like, that could have had a bigger pop, and there's a few sequences that definitely could have been done better. But overall, this is a fun movie, and actually, it feels weird to say this, but probably the third best Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. Obviously, parts 1 and 2 are the best, but 3 and 4 are definitely a step down. The prequel Leatherface, I wasn't the biggest fan of, and the Michael Bay movies I really don't like. So, Texas Chainsaw 3D, probably actually the third best movie in this franchise, which is weird to think about. Let's go ahead and start talking about the plot. I'm not going to be doing any major spoilers, but I do want to say my piece on a few plot points and make sure you guys have a basic understanding as to what this movie's about. We first of all, we open up with a scene that takes place right after Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 1. This is a direct sequel that ignores parts 2 through 4 and also the Michael Bay movies. And that's really interesting. It's kind of like what Halloween would end up doing later, and it's cool to see that Texas Chainsaw actually beat him to the punch. So it ignores everything but Part 1, and we open up right after Part 1, literally just a few hours down the road. Sheriff Hooper says, Sheriff Hooper, by the way, an obvious reference to Tobe Hooper, right, who did the first 2 movies. But Sheriff Hooper says, I need you to give up Jed Sawyer. Jed Sawyer being Leatherface. For whatever reason, it's a tradition in these movies for every continuity Leatherface to have a different name. I don't know why it is. In the first one, he was called Bubba Sawyer, and in this one, he's Jedediah Sawyer. So, yeah, it can be, it's this weird thing, I don't know why they do it, but at least the names help you keep track of continuity. But anyway, there's a bunch of Sawyers inside, and they say, hey, we should really give him up, we'll see what we can do legally, which is a weird thing that they were gonna comply, but it's interesting. But before they can comply, a rival family shows up. Yeah, we all knew the Sawyers, but it turns out that there's other big families in this neck of the woods, and the Hartmans show up, and the Hartmans hate the Sawyers, and before they can comply, they shoot into the building and they light it on fire, and almost all of the Sawyers die. Leatherface gets out the back, and a woman and a baby also get out. The woman doesn't make it. She's killed by this guy who takes the baby and decides to adopt it. So at least they save the baby. But it turns out the Sawyer woman all wear a necklace, a circle with an S through it, and the heat of the fire inadvertently causes the necklace to brand the baby, and that's going to take place later. Before we jump out of this scene, though, I do want to mention a few big things. Drayden Sawyer this time around is played by Bill Moseley, who was Chop Top in Part 2, and he does a very good job here. The grandpa is played by John Dugan, once again, who played him in the first movie. And the biggest thing here is Boss Sawyer, the leader of the Sawyer family, is played by original Leatherface Gunnar Hansen. So a cool role to give him. He's now the head of the family, and really like to see him in that role. Also, Sally from the first movie does have a cameo later on as well, and that's worth mentioning. So there's a lot to like in this first part, you know, a lot of cool references to the first movie. They rebuilt the house and everything. Then we jump forward in time about 20 years to the present of 2013, and yes, that doesn't make too much mathematical sense. The first movie took place in the late 70s, and Alexandra Daddario, who was the baby in the first movie, is now in her 20s. So that's a little weird that 1970s to 2010s is 20 years instead of 40 years. The movie really goes, look, don't think about it. But whenever they do show the first movie's date, like it's on a tombstone and there's grass covering up the year, or it's in a newspaper and the date's just out of frame, I think they're implying that the first Texas Chainsaw movie in this continuity actually took place in the 90s, which is kind of weird. According to rumor, I heard that this movie was originally supposed to be set in the 1990s, but the studio didn't want to do a period piece, so now we're left with this weird idea that the first movie actually took place in the 90s, which is weird, but the rule is don't think about it, okay? Anyway, Alexandra Daddario, the baby from the prologue, is now grown up and she's working at a grocery store as a butcher. And I really do like this. You know, it shows that subconsciously she's following the family business even if she doesn't know about her past. And it also is kind of this commentary on the changing views of jobs, where in the past a butcher was a career, you know, something you could build a livelihood on. Now it's a dead-end job in a grocery store, really kind of saying how it's harder to build your life if it's not in a big profession. You know, everything is becoming smaller and cheaper, and a weird social commentary that I don't really have time to talk about in this review. But anyway, one of her friends also works at the grocery store. She has a boyfriend, a little friend group that are gonna be cannon fodder. But when she goes home and talks to her boyfriend, turns out a letter came that explains the whole adoption thing, because her grandma just died and is leaving her everything she had, her estate, her house, her money. And she goes, wait a minute, I didn't know I had a grandma. I was adopted. She confronts her parents, who it turns into a big fight. You're better off with us. And she storms out to Texas. You know, this whole scene was set outside of Texas. They don't really say where, but it's implied from a line later that it was probably Oklahoma. And I can't help but think that this is some sort of subtle joke, you know, real whore to a Texan would be being kidnapped as a baby and taken to Oklahoma. I'm from Texas myself, so I can't help but wonder if that's some sort of implied joke there. But anyway, her and her friends decide to go to Oklahoma. They mentioned that they were already planning on going on a trip for Halloween, so they just simply decided to change destinations, which is weird. This is actually a Halloween movie. It hardly ever comes up, like later on you see decorations in a store. It doesn't really come up, but yeah, this movie's set around Halloween, so that's interesting. They, of course, get in a big van, as you do in a Texas Chainsaw movie, and they, of course, pick up a hitchhiker. This time around he seems nice, but you never know about hitchhikers in chainsaw movies. So they get to the grandma's house and they meet the lawyer there. And the lawyer says, "Here's a letter from your grandma. Read this." And of course she doesn't, and of course a lot of the movie could have been avoided if she had. So that's a little frustrating there. But also says, "Here's some keys," and there's one really big key, and we have to wonder where that goes. They go into the house, and it's a really nice house. Still very southern, but much bigger and nicer than anything else we've seen in these movies. And it's going to be a really fun place for Leatherface to chase people around. It's a cool set. Now, after they've been there for a bit, they drive off to the store, and in the movie's second really dumb decision, they decide to leave the hitchhiker at their house all alone. Don't leave strangers at your house, you don't know them. And of course, as soon as they leave, he decides to rob the place. That was a really dumb decision. But he takes the big key, and he finds that there's a secret little butler's pantry, and down the stairs, there's a big vault door that this key goes to. He opens it up, and our good friend Leatherface is being hidden in the basement there. And he just opened it up, Leatherface killed him, and now we have a Leatherface which has been confined and taken care of for 20 years, is now free, and is going to wreak some havoc to protect his home. You also get a few things. Obviously, there's going to be some Hartmans there, and also Alexandra Daddario has to figure out her family's secrets and realize who she is. Now, there's a few things, a few flaws to talk about. One, Leatherface is the only killer in this movie. Well, the only Sawyer family in this movie. You know, there's a few other characters with the Hartmans that are going to be threats, but usually it's about finding the weird family in the middle of nowhere. And here, that's only Leatherface. So I did miss not having anyone for Leatherface to bounce off of. He's still cool, but I do kind of miss having a family for him to be with. Obviously, Alexandra Daddario is related to her, but she doesn't know that, or related to him, but she doesn't know that for most of the movie. And that's kind of a problem. They do actually redesign Leatherface. His first costume is a really old mask, and he's got this red shirt on. It's cool to see him redesigned. I'm not really the biggest fan of the first costume. The second one, though, he eventually trades out for a fresher mask, and he gets an orange shirt with a little tie. I like this design a lot better. It's different, but still pretty cool. So, yeah, he's got a new costume there. Let's see, what else do we have? There's obviously the cheesy 3D stuff, which is another I could go either way on. It's cheesy, but it's also fun. But there's a few moments where you're like, oh yeah, I should be watching this in 3D. But the sequences that definitely could be better, there's one sequence where Leatherface chases Alexandra Daddario through a carnival, which is different. But I can't help but think how much more they could have pushed this. There's a fun bit where someone dressed up like the Jigsaw Killer gets scared away by Leatherface, and at the end she actually escapes on a Ferris wheel. It's interesting stuff, but I'm like, you have Leatherface at a carnival, you could have pulled all kinds of Scooby-Doo shenanigans, and they really don't, which is kind of sad, because I would really love for this sequence to go on an extra 5-10 minutes, you know, because there's so many ideas that just didn't get done here. And yeah, this could have been the movie where Leatherface goes to a carnival, you know. There's also another sequence where a cop is using a live feed from his phone to show his boss what's going on. And that could have been a cool first-person sequence, but it jumps out of the camera too much, you know. Like, you could have been confined to first person, and that would have made you feel like you were walking around inside the actual house. It could have been a point of view haunted house thing, but for whatever reason in the sequence it jumps out of the camera too much, and I don't know why they did that. when we're talking about flaws too, there is a few sequences of bad CGI gore, especially one kill right towards the end. They do practical for most of it, and I'm glad that they did, but every now and then there's some CGI, especially the last kill, that just doesn't look too great. But overall, though, I do want to say that even though it definitely has these flaws and that does drag it down, there's a lot to like with this movie, you know? Like I said, Alexandra Daddario having to learn that she's related to this family and having to come to grips with that and understand what it means to be a Sawyer. I really like as the movie goes on when she starts to understand these things and how it starts to change her, and I really do feel that that's one of the better elements of the movie. They also treat Leatherface more sympathetically, and I like that as well, because Leatherface, and in his heart, doesn't want to be a villain. It's just the world he was placed in that forced him into that role, and I do like that this movie gets that as well. And you know, the different story with the rival families and learning to be a part of the Sawyer family, that's really different. And like I said, there's some cool kills and some cool gore in this movie. You know, a quite memorable scene with the chainsaw and cutting someone right in half. That's pretty cool. So there is a lot to like here. It has definite flaws, but like I said, this is probably the third best movie in the series, you know? And if you want a dumb, fun slasher movie, there's a lot to like here, and I definitely recommend it to that crowd. You know, if you're the serious people, you want part 1 and maybe part 2 if you understand it. Like, the serious movie crowd didn't originally understand part 2, but I think they're starting to come around to it. But this is definitely more for the dumb, fun crowd. If you like cheesy, over-the-top slasher movies, there's a lot to like here and a really good lead, so I'd recommend it to that crowd. I had some fun with it. Anyway, to everyone who's watched so far, thank you for watching. To everyone who's liked and subscribed, thank you. You really are helping the channel out. I'll put a relevant playlist on the bottom. If you guys want to see more, you can click there and see more. That should be my Texas Chainsaw Massacre playlist, and I'm going to be working on filling that out this month. Anyway, have a good day. I'll see you guys again very, very soon. Relevant playlist on the bottom. Have a good day now.